I live right now in Washington, D.C. That's why his face is on Mount Rushmore. We all know what Abraham Lincoln did to save the Union, to make sure that today we still have a United States of America. But I don't want to talk to you about Abraham Lincoln, the legends. I don't want to talk to you about the mythology. I want you to understand Abraham Lincoln, the human, the man. Because there was nothing inevitable about what Abraham Lincoln became. Okay, we've got another city joining us.
Are they in the right place?
Who do we have?
Somebody.
Go ahead and join us. Come on in. Come on in.
That's from the beginning.
Yes, come on in. Just file in behind. Let's go. Right.
Should be Smith, Gott, and Bryant.
So we got an extra here. Non-maker. Non-maker. Non-maker is a bonus. All right.
Nonemaker's supposed to be at Washington.
We'll take y'all though.
Is he go to Park City or
Take y'all, because no one else will.
Nice.
Hey guys, hurry up. Listen up. Sit down. All right, God, as I was telling your fellow delegates, my name's Matthew Flaherty. I'm your Chief of Staff here at Oklahoma Boys State. It's my honor to speak with you this evening about Abraham Lincoln. He's my favorite president for so many reasons, and you guys have all learned about those reasons in history class. He saved the Union. That's why they build monuments like this, like the one in Washington, D.C., where I currently live, and why his face is on Mount Rushmore. We know Lincoln the legend. What we're going to talk about tonight is Lincoln the man, because there was nothing inevitable about what he became. Nothing. He was a man just like you were, just like you are now. Probably in worse conditions. We'll talk about that for a moment. So how did Lincoln become the savior of the Union? How was he ready when his moment came? How did he seize his moment to save our Union so that we have a United States of America like we do today? I'm going to share 3 lessons with you. The first has to do with learning. This may sound trivial. This may sound a little bit juvenile. Learning, right? You all don't realize how good you have it. You just seriously cannot. You take it for granted every single day. Every time you pull up your smartphone and you play on TikTok, or you spend 2 hours in front of a television playing video games or streaming Netflix, you do not realize how good you have it as individuals. Abraham Lincoln, when he was a boy, he only got 1 year of formal schooling until his dad pulled him out of school to work on their family farm because he needed the labor, because they needed to eat, they needed to earn money, they needed to have income so that they wouldn't starve and die. 1 year of formal schooling. And Abraham Lincoln was able to eventually become a lawyer and eventually become a congressperson and then eventually the President of the United States with 1 year of formal schooling. How did he do that? Well, I'll tell you how. He found every single book he could get his hands on, from his youth all the way up to being an adult. And he read it and he studied it. His dad hated it. Every time his dad saw him with a book, he would whip him and he would burn or shred the book. Every single time. Lincoln would have to escape from the house, sneak off into the woods where he could read and collect his thoughts in solitude, hopefully without his dad looking for him. That's the effort that he exerted in order to get the knowledge that he needed to accomplish his goals. How hard is it for you to find a book? For you to get the knowledge that you need to be a good citizen? Not very hard, is it? You all have it in your pockets right now. You can pull up every single book that Abraham Lincoln read for free, right? There's no copyright restrictions on that literature anymore. It's all free. And there's plenty of other good information out there too. Lincoln would tell you that there's nothing more important to your individual success than your own desire to put in the effort. And I know that because he wrote it in his journal. he would reflect on his thoughts and he would journal. So that's the second thing you need to understand about learning, is you need to sit down and come to terms with your own thoughts, what you're thinking, what you believe, and write it down somewhere. It's not just enough to think it. It's not just enough to like a tweet on Facebook or on Twitter or wherever it may be. You need to develop your own thinking and your own beliefs, like Lincoln did. So that's the first thing that you need to understand, is the importance of learning and how important that was to Abraham Lincoln. The second thing you need to understand is failure and resilience. Lieutenant Governor spoke to you a little bit about this yesterday. He called it grit. I'm going to call it resilience. Abraham Lincoln did not have an easy path. We just talked about how his dad tried to hold him back and keep him on the farm every step of the way. But even as Abraham Lincoln grew up into an adult, his life was not easy. He didn't have a place to live when he left home. He had to bunk in someone's attic. Success did not come natural to him. He lost 2 races when he was trying to run for Congress. He didn't get the nominations. He lost 2 races for the United States Senate, where he came up short. He tried to run for vice president and lost that nomination. He has a history, and if you guys read this about him, of severe depression. He was not well mentally, and that part of that was because he was constantly dwelling on his thoughts, especially as they were related to the United States and how we could become a more perfect union. He had severe cases of depression. He was far from a perfect person, and he had failure every step of the way. But what differentiates Lincoln from most people is that rather than failing and stopping, or failing and becoming worse, what Lincoln did was he used those failures as lessons to learn. Most of us, when we fail, are we really examining what led to that failure? And are we trying to learn lessons from it to make us better? And then how long do those lessons last before we revert back into our old behaviors and our old habits and do the same thing that we were doing previously that led to that failure? Lincoln, in his habit of journaling again, would constantly reflect on what worked and what didn't, and he would try to learn how to do things better the next time. And there's nothing inevitable about that. Whether you learn from failure and from success for that matter depends on you. It depends on you reflecting on that moment and on that experience and deciding, making a conscious decision, am I going to be better because of this or worse off because of this? And that is a choice that you will make every single step of the way. That failure is only momentarily, and sometimes there are consequences for that failure, but in many cases you determine the long-term outlook of where that failure leads based on your decisions and your ability to reflect on it and learn lessons from it. And that was Lincoln's other secret as a man, is he was able to sit down each time he got it wrong or came up short and figure out a better way. That eventually led to him earning the nomination and ultimately winning the election to become President of the United States. He learned from those failures. He learned the importance of the political process, how to be a politician from all those failures, and when it came time to run for president, he had some sneaky ways in which he seized the nomination from individuals that were more favored than he was. And when that happened, they were none too happy about it, I'll tell you that. And so then this leads to the third thing that made Lincoln special in my mind as a man. And this is, he would embrace his rivals. There's a whole long book written on this that I would encourage every single one of you to read. It's called Team of Rivals. It's the theme that goes throughout it. What differentiated Lincoln from many politicians of his time, and certainly from almost every politician of our current generation, is that Lincoln embraced his rivals. When Lincoln upset the apple cart and earned the nomination for the Republican Party to run for president and then ultimately won the presidency, his rivals were not happy that he leapfrogged them. They thought it was their turn. They thought they were more favored. They also thought he used some unsavory tactics in order to seize the nomination. And Lincoln could have dismissed them out of hand. I mean, there were some words spoken amongst those individuals that were none too kind. But instead, what Lincoln did was not only hand out an olive branch, but he brought them into his cabinet. He had them as his Secretary of State, his Attorney General, his Secretary of the Treasury. He brought them into his cabinet because he knew that they were stronger together, and he also knew that they believed things slightly different than he did, and he needed their opinions. He did not want an echo chamber in his White House or in his cabinet. He proactively embraced people who were against him, who had opinions that were different from him, because he knew that that would make him a better leader. And he knew how divided the United States was at that time, and he knew that he was going to need the support and the outlook from people that saw things differently than he did in order to keep the United States together. Today, that's what ails us as a country, is we see the political divide growing farther and farther and farther apart. Lincoln would not stand for that. He would reach out and try to embrace those that disagreed with him. He would show extensive amounts of empathy to try to put himself in other people's shoes and understand where they were coming from and try to bring them over to his side. And so when you see the divisiveness in our country, think back to what Lincoln did and how he would bring people that didn't agree with him, that were rivals to him, and that some of them did not like him, actively disliked him, and he would earn their trust and ultimately their friendship, and they would save the Union together. That's Lincoln the man for you. Those three things. And that's something that all of you can do day in and day out. You can make a commitment to learning, right? You can make a commitment to learn from your failures and show resilience. And you can certainly, absolutely, and I implore you to embrace your rivals. Embrace those that have different opinions than you. Learn from them. Share your opinions with them. You will both be better off for it. Those three things are the examples that Lincoln the man left us. And that's his secret sauce, in my opinion. And so if you guys take those three lessons away tonight, our country, your future, this state, will all be better off for it. But that's a choice that you all will make day in and day out. So I've got about 5 extra minutes here. I'm going to share you all a fun story about the Gettysburg Address. How many people know who was the keynote speaker of the Gettysburg Address? Raise your hand. Come on. Come on. You guys haven't heard about Gettysburg commemoration? Who's the keynote speaker? Who was the keynote speaker?
I can't remember his name. He was a famous English writer.
You know?
Abraham Lincoln.
It was not Abraham Lincoln. Trick
was.
question. The keynote speaker at the Gettysburg commemoration was the president of Harvard. His name was Edward Everett. Edward Everett. Lincoln at the time was not very popular. The Union was not doing well in the war leading up to Gettysburg. Gettysburg was what really turned things around for us. But at the time, Lincoln wasn't very popular. And so, when it came time to commemorate the battlefield at Gettysburg, Edward Everett, the president of Harvard, was asked to come and speak. Does anybody know how long he spoke for?
2 hours.
2 hours. He spoke for 2 hours. Can anybody tell me what Edward Everett said that evening?
The whole 2 hours?
Nope.
Can anybody tell me anything he said? Anything.
We're here to honor the dead.
Slavery.
Maybe he said the, right?
The
Nobody remembers what Edward Everett said. Abraham Lincoln, not the keynote speaker, invited to say a few words upon the commemoration, spoke for 2 minutes, spoke 242 words. And we all learn them, and they'll live immortally. But again, and I got to point this out, I'm going to have to read this just so you guys believe me, because I don't want to get it wrong. His speech was not necessarily well received at the time. And so when you guys, there's a lot of criticism that you hear constantly. There's always a critic out there. One of my favorite rules of leadership is that rule number 1 is you cannot make everybody happy. And this is proof of it. We all know the Gettysburg Address. We all know what Lincoln said. We all know those solemn words. But the reaction to his speech at the time was divided. One newspaper wrote, and here's the quotes, "The ceremony was rendered ludicrous by some of the sallies of that poor President Lincoln." And another wrote, "We pass over the silly remarks of the President. For the credit of the nation, we are willing that the veil of oblivion shall be dropped over them, and that they shall no more be repeated or thought of." And these are newspapers in the North. in the North about the Gettysburg Address. And so if you remember two things from that, remember one, it's okay to be number two. It's how you perform that determines whether you're number one. Brevity matters, right? You don't have to speak for a long amount of time to make a difference. And certainly, not everybody's going to be a fan of what you say or what you think or what you believe. There will always be critics. Always. But don't mind the critics so much. If you are confident in your beliefs, if you take time to reflect on them and be true to yourself, don't mind the critics. Find those that are your tribe. Embrace them. You know the right path forward if you do that. So just let the critics be the critics. They're always going to be out there. And let them be. Don't pay it any mind.
How do you know that the critic's path isn't the correct one?
Well, that's what I said. What I'm telling you is you need to be the one that reflects on yourself. Right? If you're true to your beliefs, you'll know if it's just noise. You'll know. But that's a decision for you to make. All right, gentlemen, that's my time. It was a pleasure spending this evening with you. Thank you all. No applause. It's all right. It's all right. I want you all to think on that. All right? What are the three things that we talked about? What's the first one?
Learning.
Learning. Say it with me. What's the first one?
Learning.
What's the second one? Resilience. The second one, resilience. Right? Learning from failure. What's the third one? Embracing your rivals. All right, let's do it again. What's the first one?
Learning.
What's the second one?
Resilience.
What's the third one?
Embracing your rivals.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. You got the learning objectives. It was a pleasure.
I can't feel my legs. Bro, neither can I.
I can't get it. My legs are dead asleep.
Spotlight. Moonlight.